It's good to see so many people here as well. Yeah, just to say, I'm Owen Hewitson. I'm a psychoanalyst. I practice in the Lacanian orientation, but my clinical training was more pluralistic and interdisciplinary. So if you're not into Lacan, hopefully what I'm saying or what I'm going to say is still going to make sense to you. We'll walk through it. Um, what I wanted to do today was to give you an introduction to something that I've been interested in for a while. Firstly, because it was the subject of my PhD, but also because now in my clinical work, I'm always struck by the fact that when someone comes to see me and they talk about the ways in which they suffer, that there are so many parallels or echoes to events in their family history. So what I hope to be able to do is to kind of pique your interest in this as a topic, as a phenomenon, and maybe get you as intrigued as I've been in it. So I'll talk for 45 minutes to an hour, and we'll have plenty of time for discussion afterwards. Okay. Uh, so I want to begin with two examples just as a way into this idea of how family history can affect individuals. And I've chosen two artists, Vincent van Gogh and Salvador Dali. Perhaps because I'm married to an artist, so I'm always kind of looking for the ways in which art and psychoanalysis marry up. Um, and I kind of think of these examples, one of tragedy and one of something a bit more like comedy. So if we start with Van Gogh, so Vincent van Gogh was born on the 30th of March, 1853, and he was born 1 year to the day after Vincent van Gogh, right? The parents' eldest child who died, I think, was born stillborn, and who shared the same name. So when Vincent van Gogh's beloved brother Theo had his own son, he named him Vincent in a kind of a homage to his brother, to his painter brother. And a few months after his son's birth, he writes to his brother and he says, I hope that this Vincent, his son, will be able to live and accomplish something. Right? When Vincent van Gogh receives that letter, he attempts suicide. It's as if for him there couldn't be two Vincent van Goghs that are living at the same time, as if his brother had put his finger on something about a kind of an impossibility of co-presence, right? Taking the place and taking the name which hadn't been destined for him. So, as we know, Vincent van Gogh's life was very tragic. It was, you could say, perhaps a life that was lived in some way as if at some level he didn't believe he should exist. Now, Salvador Dali, in some ways, had a very similar biography. He knew himself that another Salvador Dali had preceded him, also a brother by the same name, and who had died a year before he was born. And in the family history, this previously born brother, this dead brother, was the real Salvador Dali. And his mother would go to the tomb and would cry twice a week over the tomb, over the grave. And Dali spoke about how he made a very conscious decision when he was quite young to become a kind of a clown, to separate himself or differentiate himself from the Salvador Dali, who was this beautiful, worshipped little angel for the parents. So I've included here a picture of a painting by a guy called Jean-Francois Millet, who the painting is called The Angelus. And Dali was obsessed with this painting. He painted 64 different versions of it during his life. In it, we see a farmer and his wife, their heads are bowed, they're looking down at a basket of potatoes. Um, Millet, in his memoirs, notes that originally this wasn't a basket of potatoes, it was the casket of a dead child. But he was advised by a friend, you better change it to something a bit lighter because if it's too morbid, people won't buy it. So when Dali heard this story, he said, apparently, "Oh, I always felt the presence of a dead child in that painting." So in response to a quite tragic event in the family history, Dali takes on a persona, performs a comedy, becoming the clown in order to separate himself from the image of the deceased sibling. Okay. So in these two stories, one that's tragic, one that's comic, we get a sense of how an experience in one generation is transmitted to a later generation, how it's manifested in that generation, and how the effects of that transmission are produced. And this is my kind of like working understanding of what we can take by unconscious generational transmission. Okay. Yeah, well, I think the great thing about Lacan is that he is always in dialogue with other people. Right? And you pick up any of his seminars, and they'll not only are there loads of people in his seminars, and he's giving them the stage at different points, but he's also talking about papers that he's read and philosophers that he's met. So my kind of suggestion would be that you read a bit around, not necessarily Lacan himself sometimes, but like the problems that he's interested in. And I think that Lacan makes most sense when you see his work as a response to problems, clinical problems that were, he felt, approached inadequately by the analysts of his time. Right? And I think that um, for me, to answer your question about why, how I kind of got into it, psychoanalysis makes the most sense as a historical sort of thing. If you know psychoanalytic history, suddenly things become a lot clearer. You see that there's a clinical problem that needs to be addressed, and then you can kind of trace the way in which people thought about that. And the great thing about Freud is that he's always changing his mind. Like, he's always upsetting people, leaving people behind, um, taking people with him, and then like disappointing them when he changes his mind about the thing that's made them stick with him. Right. So I think there's a really interesting kind of historical journey that you can take reading about psychoanalytic history as a way to sort of get into it and get into Lacan.